The world is not always as simple as it seems at first glance. Sometimes the most ordinary things can hide something unusual, even dangerous. That's how our story begins, with an ordinary man who stumbled upon something that could change his life forever. The main character, Alexei, a young programmer from a small town, has always been fascinated by old video games. His collection numbered hundreds of discs, but one day he found a game that was unlike any he already had. It was an ordinary day when Alexei stopped by a small vintage store located in a narrow alleyway of his town. Among the dusty shelves and stacks of old books, a box labeled Game of Shadows caught his eye. The box was ruined by time, and the cover looked like a still from an old horror movie. There was no description on the cover, just the title and a warning, "Play if you dare." Alexei didn't hesitate to buy it. At home, sitting at his computer, Alexei inserted the disc into the drive and started the game. On the screen appeared an old-fashioned menu with one single item: Start Game. The graphics were primitive, but that was the beauty of it. The game was an adventure in the style of old quests, where the player had to explore an abandoned castle, solve riddles, and avoid traps. But the further he progressed, the weirder the quests became. They began to somehow reflect his personal life, mentioning events that no game could know about. The rooms of the castle began to resemble places from his childhood, and some of the puzzles were related to his most secret fears. At the same time, strange things began to happen in his house. The room would suddenly become cold, or there would be whispers and rustles from behind his back. Alexei tried to convince himself that these were just coincidences caused by fatigue and overwork. However, soon an event occurred that could not be explained logically. During a regular game session, while solving one of the puzzles, he heard someone's voice right behind his back. The voice whispered the name of the main character. It sounded so realistic that Alexei turned around, expecting to see someone in the room. But there was no one. After this incident, Alexei began to notice that the game seemed to react to his actions in the real world. If he put off the game and got up from behind the computer, events happened in the game that could only happen with his participation. All these strange coincidences and unexplained phenomena made Alexei think that the game he found was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. He decided to conduct his own investigation and find out what the Game of Shadows really is and what mystery it hides. As Alexei immersed himself in the world of the Game of Shadows, his life began to change. Not only did his personal space become an arena for inexplicable phenomena, but the people around him began to suffer from strange and sometimes tragic events. The first thing Alexei decided to find out where the game came from. He returned to the store with antique items, but found that it was closed. Neighbors in the neighborhood reported that the store suddenly stopped operating shortly after Alexei had purchased the game there. The owner of the store, as it turned out, had disappeared without a trace. Trying to find other copies of the game on the internet, Alexei came across forums where old and forgotten video games were discussed. To his surprise, he found no mention of Game of Shadows anywhere. This was odd, considering that most games, even the most unusual and rare ones, had some sort of footprint in the digital world. However, Game of Shadows seemed to have been completely erased from video game history, except for this single copy that he happened to have. Events around Alexei began to escalate. His best friend, Igor, with whom he had shared the story of the strange game, was involved in a car accident on the way home after their meeting. Igor survived, but suffered serious injuries. Doctors called his rescue a miracle. Alexei couldn't get rid of the thought that it wasn't a simple coincidence. The game seemed to warn him, demonstrating his power not only in the virtual world, but also in the real world. Shortly after Igor's accident, one of Alexei's co-workers at work, who had also seen a box of the game in his house, abruptly quit, claiming she had to get as far away as possible and start a new life. She was pale and frightened when she informed Alexei of this, refusing to explain the reasons for her decision. Now that the game was beginning to affect not only him, but the people around him, Alexei realized that he had to find a way to stop it. He began to investigate the game more thoroughly, trying to find clues in it or any way to unravel its mystery. One night, while advancing through one of the abandoned corridors in the game, he found a secret room that was not listed on the map. In the room was an altar, and on it lay a strange artifact that Alexei could take into his inventory. As soon as he did, the game suddenly shut down and the computer stopped responding to any attempts to turn it back on. The next morning, Alexei found that the artifact from the game had materialized in the real world and was lying on his desktop. This was the beginning of understanding how deeply the game could interfere with reality and what secrets it still held. Having obtained physical proof of the game's impact on the real world, Alexei realized the seriousness of his situation. The artifact now lying on his desk was the key not only to unlocking the mysteries of the game, but also to the way to stop it. He began searching for any information about such cases, about artifacts materializing from the virtual world, and about any events related to the Game of Shadows. Alexei decided to start by researching the artifact. It was made of an unknown material, dark, almost black in color, with incomprehensible symbols engraved all over its surface. The symbols resembled ancient runes, but there was nothing similar in any of the sources Alexei had studied. This made him wonder about the origin of the game. Perhaps it was not created in our world or time. In search of answers, Alexei turned to online communities specializing in the occult and paranormal phenomena. He posted photos of the artifact and a description of the symbols, hoping that someone would be able to decipher them or offer information about their origin. To his surprise, one user recognized the symbols as an ancient language that legends say was used in rituals to summon entities from other worlds. This discovery prompted Alexei to study occult rituals and their connection to the game. He began to suspect that the Game of Shadows might have been created as part of such a ritual, the purpose of which was to open a portal between worlds. The artifact apparently served as the key to that portal, allowing the real world to be influenced through the game. Realizing the risk, Alexei continued his research with even more fervor. He began experimenting with the artifact, trying to figure out how it could be used to control or even close the portal. During one of his experiments, he noticed that the artifact was reacting to his thoughts and actions in the game. When he focused on wanting to change something in the game, the artifact would vibrate slightly, and the game would change accordingly. This discovery gave Alexei hope. If the artifact could indeed affect the game and through it, the real world, then perhaps he could find a way to use it to destroy the portal. To do so, however, he needed to further understand the mechanisms of interaction between the game, the artifact, and reality. Alexei decided that the next step should be to visit a library where he could find more information about ancient languages and rituals. His goal was a book mentioned by a forum user who helped him decipher the symbols, shadow paths, portals between worlds, and ancient rituals. Alexei found the mentioned book in the library and began to study it. He discovered that many of the rituals described required the use of artifacts similar to the one he had, and that these rituals often ended with disastrous consequences for those who performed them. Now armed with his new knowledge, Alexei was ready to try to unravel the mystery of the Game of Shadows and find a way to stop its effects on the real world. But he also realized that time was playing against him. Every day the game grew stronger, and Alexei could feel his connection to reality becoming more and more tenuous. Realizing that every day brought new threats, Alexei decided to act immediately. His plan was to use the artifact as a means to unravel and possibly neutralize the magical ritual behind the Game of Shadows. He began with experiments that would show how the artifact could affect the game, and, through it, the real world. Alexei noticed that by focusing on certain thoughts or objects in the real world, he could cause corresponding changes in the game. If he thought about closing a door in his room, the door appeared in the game and closed. This discovery gave him hope that the artifact could indeed be the key to the solution. However, every action with the artifact seemed to strengthen the connection between the game and reality. New strange events began to occur. Things disappeared from his house and appeared in the game, and some entities from the game began to flicker in his peripheral vision, even when the computer was turned off. Alexei realized that the game was getting stronger and decided to seek help from the paranormal research community on the internet. He shared his findings and asked for advice on how to use the artifact to close the portal. The answer came from a user who called himself a specialist in ancient rituals. He warned Alexei that an attempt to interfere with the ritual could lead to unpredictable consequences, including strengthening the connection between worlds and increasing the power of the game over reality. Despite the warnings, Alexei was determined to find a way to stop the game. He began to delve deeper into the materials on the rituals associated with portals between worlds and sought any information on how the artifact could be used for this purpose. His research led him to the theory that in order to close the portal, a counter ritual must be performed in-game, using the artifact as a catalyst. Alexei prepared everything necessary to perform the counter ritual. He placed the artifact on a specially prepared altar in front of the computer screen and began the ritual, concentrating on his desire to close the portal and break the connection between the game and the real world. At that moment, the game suddenly changed. The screen was swallowed by darkness, and then images and symbols appeared that Alexei had previously seen only on the artifact. Suddenly, it seemed that the whole world around him began to deform, creating the feeling that reality and the virtual world began to merge. Alexei felt the power of the artifact growing, and his own energy also seemed to become part of the process. Then he realized that the counter ritual was really working, but to complete it, something else had to be done that he hadn't foreseen. Alexei focused all his will and energy on one goal: to close the portal despite the risks and possible consequences for himself. Alexei felt the vibration of the artifact increase, and his own thoughts became increasingly blurred. At that moment, he realized that the counter ritual would require much more from him than just will and concentration. It was a struggle not only to close the portal, but for his own existence. As if in a hallucination, he saw the symbols on the artifact glow with a bright light, and the computer screen pulsed in time with that light. Suddenly, the virtual world of the game began to manifest itself in his room. Shadows took the form of creatures from the game, and the walls of the room seemed to dissolve into thin air. At this critical moment, Alexei heard voices. They sounded in his head, offering help. They were the voices of other players who had once been trapped in the game of shadows and now existed somewhere on the edge between worlds. They joined forces with Alexei, giving him the energy and knowledge he needed to complete the ritual. With their help, Alexei was able to increase his impact on the game. He began to reprogram it from within, using the artifact as a bridge between reality and the virtual world. Together, they created new codes and spells inside the game, which were aimed at destroying the portal. Gradually, the resistance began to bear fruit. The virtual creatures that had entered his room began to disappear, and the walls returned to their normal shape. The darkness on the screen began to dissipate, revealing a view of the castle in the game, which now seemed abandoned and lifeless. But the success was incomplete. At the last moment, as the portal began to close, a powerful energy erupted from it and struck Alexei. He felt a sharp pain and loss of consciousness. When Alexei regained consciousness, he found himself lying on the floor of his room. The computer was turned off and the artifact was gone. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had ever happened. But he felt a deep fatigue and realized that something had changed. He tried to turn on the computer, but in vain. The shadow game had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. It was a victory, but a victory achieved at the cost of great effort and loss. Alexei realized that the world around him would no longer be the same. It had changed, and so had Alexei himself. In the days that followed, he tried to return to his normal life, but he felt a deep connection to those who had helped him in his fight against the game. He knew that somewhere there were many more uncharted portals and worlds that required his attention and possibly intervention. Alexei became a paranormal researcher, using his experiences to help others who encounter similar phenomena. He would never forget the shadow game and the lessons it taught him. But now he knew he had the power to resist the darkness, and he was not alone in that struggle. After his conflict with the game of shadows, Alexei devoted himself to the study of paranormal phenomena, particularly interested in the connections between the real world and unknown dimensions. His experiences with the artifact and the game opened doors for him to a world where the boundaries between the physical and the virtual were not as obvious as previously thought. Armed with new knowledge and technology, Alexei began researching other cases where people had encountered anomalies similar to the one that haunted him. He learned of the existence of other portals hidden in the shadows of our world that could be activated in a variety of ways, including ancient rituals, modern technology, and even human emotion. One day, Alexei received a letter from a woman named Marina, who claimed that her son had gone missing after he started playing a strange online game. She described phenomena so similar to what Alexei had experienced that he could not remain indifferent. He immediately contacted Marina and began investigating. While researching her son's disappearance, Alexei discovered that the game the boy was playing was connected to one of the portals. It seemed that the game developers had intentionally used the portal to create a more realistic gaming experience without fully realizing the consequences of their actions. Alexei realized that if he didn't close this portal, the disappearances could continue. He began preparing for a new mission, this time assembling a team of like-minded individuals who shared his interest in the paranormal and had expertise in fields ranging from information technology to the occult. Together, they devised a plan of action that included not only closing the portal, but also rescuing those who might have been drawn into it. Using special equipment to detect anomalies in the Earth's energy field, Alexei's team was able to localize the portal. It was located in an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a place the locals considered cursed. Once there, Alexei and his team began the ritual that would close the portal. The work was dangerous. The portal turned out to be unstable, and at any moment could release energy capable of destroying everything around them. Nevertheless, through their combined efforts and the knowledge Alexei had acquired during his previous struggle with the shadow game, they were able to successfully close the portal and rescue several missing people, including Marina's son. This success solidified Alexei's reputation as a paranormal specialist and opened new horizons for him to explore. However, he also realized that the world was full of mysteries, and every closed portal could lead to the discovery of a new one. Each case convinced him more and more that there were thin boundaries between different worlds, and that there were forces interested in erasing those boundaries. He knew that his work was far from over, and that new challenges lay ahead. After successfully closing the portal and rescuing the missing people, Alexei and his team faced a new challenge. Their actions attracted the attention of those who had their own interests in using the portals. An unknown group engaged in occult research began to pursue Alexei and his friends, seeking to learn the secrets of portal control. Alexei realized that his activities could lead to dangerous consequences, not only for himself, but also for his loved ones. He decided to proceed cautiously, while trying to find out who was behind this group and what their true goals were. However, despite all the precautions, tragedy struck. One of Alexei's team members, a young paranormal researcher named Dmitri, was found dead. Everything indicated that it was more than just an accident. Near his body, they found symbols very similar to those used in rituals to open portals. This event deeply shook Alexei and his entire team. They realized that they faced a serious threat from people who were willing to kill to achieve their goals. Alexei felt guilty for dragging his friends into dangerous research and decided that he had to act more decisively and cautiously. He assembled a team to discuss the way forward. They decided that they needed to find and neutralize the group behind Dmitri's harassment and murder as soon as possible. Alexei suggested that they use all the resources and knowledge available to them to find these people, as well as increase security measures to protect every member of the team. At this time, Alexei also began his own investigation to find out what other portals might be activated and what threat they posed. He used information from Marina and others who had encountered anomalies to map out potential locations with high portal activity. As the investigation progressed, Alexei and his team encountered new challenges and dangers. They discovered that the group was using the portals not only for research purposes, but also to gain access to parallel worlds, searching them for sources of power and knowledge that could be used to control the real world. Alexei realized that dealing with this threat would require not only knowledge and determination from him and his team, but also a willingness to face the unknown. They were on the verge of discoveries that could change humanity's understanding of reality itself. After losing Dmitri, Alexei and his team redoubled their efforts in investigating the secret organization and its connection to the portals. Their research led them to an ancient manuscript that they suspected might hold the key to controlling the portals. This document was written in a language that predated modern times and contained detailed descriptions of the rituals and symbols used to manipulate the energy of the portals. Alexei realized that this manuscript could give them an advantage over their enemies. The team set to work translating and interpreting the text, using every resource available to them. With each page, they learned more about the ancient civilizations that once possessed knowledge of portals and used them to travel between worlds. At the same time, the organization stepped up their attempts to stop Alexei and his team. Several times their base was attacked by unknown forces, and only through precautionary security measures and vigilance were they able to avoid serious losses. But with each attack, it became more and more difficult to protect their knowledge and achievements. Finally, after months of hard work, the team managed to decipher key parts of the manuscript. They discovered that controlling the portals required a special ritual, with an artifact at its center, similar to the one Alexei had used to close the Game of Shadows. This discovery made Alexei think that the artifact might not have disappeared, but had been moved to another place or time by the portal. Realizing that without the artifact, they would not be able to fully control the portals, Alexei decided to begin the search. Using information from the manuscript, the team was able to determine the possible location of the artifact. It was in a remote and inaccessible area where, according to ancient texts, one of the first portals was once opened. Preparations for the expedition took several weeks. Alexei and his team had equipped themselves with everything they needed, including special equipment for detecting and controlling portals. They knew that not only physical but also mystical dangers lay ahead of them. When they arrived at the site, they found ancient ruins that appeared to be part of a complex used for portal-related ceremonies. In the center of the ruins was an altar, and next to it was an artifact, the same one that had disappeared after the ritual with the Shadow Gate. With the return of the artifact, the team felt a surge of strength and confidence. Now they had everything they needed to perform the ritual to control the portals. But before they started, Alexei realized that they had to be absolutely sure of their actions, because the consequences could be unpredictable. Armed with the knowledge from the ancient manuscript and the newfound artifact, Alexei and his team began to prepare for the ritual that would change the fate of the portals forever. They realized the magnitude of the upcoming challenge and the risks associated with the ritual. But their determination to fight the unknown threat and prevent possible catastrophes gave them strength. The ritual was to take place during the full moon, when the energy flow between the worlds was at its peak. The ancient ruins where they found the artifact were chosen as the place for the ritual, as this area was a natural crossroads of energy lines, which made it ideal for manipulating portals. As soon as the full moon began, Alexei and his team began the ritual. Alexei placed the artifact on the altar and began reciting spells from the manuscript, while the rest of the team took their positions around the altar, each focusing on their part of the ritual. Suddenly, the space around the altar began to distort, creating a vortex of energy that gradually increased in size. The light from the artifact grew brighter and brighter, illuminating the ruins with a mystical glow. At that moment, shadows of beings from other worlds began to appear from the portal that began to form above the altar, trying to penetrate our world. Alexei's team clashed with the entities, trying to push them back into the portal, using both traditional weapons and defense spells from the manuscript. The fight was brutal and exhausting, each of them realizing that not only their own fate, but the future of the entire world depended on the outcome of this battle. Alexei, using the artifact, concentrated all his will and knowledge to intensify the energy of the ritual. At the climax, he spoke the last words of the spell, and the artifact emitted a blinding light that engulfed everything around it. When the light faded, Alexei and his team found that the portal had closed and the shadows of the creatures had disappeared. Their mission was accomplished, but victory did not come easy. They felt exhausted, but also relieved that disaster had been averted. Returning home, Alexei reflected on the fact that their victory might be temporary. The world still held many unexplored corners and mysteries, but now he knew he had a team he could rely on, and the knowledge to meet new challenges. They were ready for new adventures and explorations, knowing that there were still many unknowns and dangers ahead, but also opportunities for new discoveries. After the decisive battle and the closing of the portal, life was slowly returning to normal. However, for Alexei and his team, nothing could ever be the same again. They came face to face with the unknown and won, opening up new horizons and possibilities. The experience gained from fighting portals and other worlds had changed them, making them stronger and wiser. In the days after the ritual, Alexei spent a lot of time reflecting on his path. He realized that his life was now inextricably linked to researching paranormal phenomena and protecting the world from unknown threats. The decision to preserve the artifact and the knowledge gained from the manuscript was the first step in creating an organization whose purpose would be to research and control abnormal phenomena. Gathering scientists, researchers, and experts in the occult around him, Alexei founded the Institute for Transworld Research, an organization whose mission was not only to study portals and parallel worlds, but also to train new researchers. Soon after, the Institute began to attract attention from around the world. Scientists, students, and adventurers sought to join, eager to participate in research and expeditions. Alexei and his team developed a training program that included not only theoretical knowledge of paranormal phenomena, but also practical survival and protection skills. One of the Institute's first projects was to create a map of portals located around the world. Using data from the manuscript and their own research, the team began marking locations where energy activity indicated the possible existence of portals. This map became the basis for future expeditions and research projects. But the Institute was not only concerned with finding and studying portals. One of its tasks was also to prevent the abuses and dangers associated with them. Alexei knew that knowledge of portals could fall into the hands of those who would want to use it for profit. And so he aimed to ensure that such powerful and dangerous technology was kept safely under control. Like any frontier of new knowledge, the Institute's work was not without risks and surprises. But under the leadership of Alexei and his team, the organization was quickly becoming a beacon in the world of exploring the unknown. A beacon for those who sought to understand and protect the world from unknown threats. The story of Alexei and the Game of Shadows was only the first chapter in the book of their adventures. Ahead of them awaited new discoveries, challenges, and, no doubt, new victories. They went forward with the confidence that together they could withstand any challenges that the unknown world presented to them. If these dark and absolutely real stories made your heart beat faster, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your subscription and likes will help us share even more thrilling stories with you. And of course, to make sure you don't miss our next videos with horrifying stories, activate notifications. Join our community of lovers of mysticism and the unknown, and be ready for new portions of adrenaline. Alexei had always dreamed of a weekend when he could be alone, without parents, without responsibilities, without constant supervision. When they had announced their sudden departure to their relatives for 2 days, he had barely contained his excitement. The old house on the outskirts of town where they lived seemed like the perfect place for such an adventure. The first night was spent in the spirit of complete freedom. Video games until deep into the night, horror movies he'd long wanted to watch, and pizza for dinner. The house, usually full of life, suddenly fell into silence, and Alexei savored every moment. But when he went to bed, strange things started happening in the house. At first, it seemed to him to be the result of an overabundance of impressions from the movies he had watched. However, as time passed, the rustles and sounds became more and more distinct and disturbing. Alexei tried to convince himself that it was just a branch scratching a window or old pipes. But in the back of his mind, he felt that it wasn't. Each time he got up to check the source of the noise, he found nothing but empty, dark rooms where the silence seemed even more deafening after his footsteps. On the morning, met with no sleep and full of inner tension, Alexei discovered the first inexplicable traces. The prints of dirty hands on the window in his room. Although all the doors and windows were closed from the inside, he spent that day trying to distract himself and explain the night's incidents logically. But an inner voice told him that the next night promised to be even more disturbing. After the first restless night, Alexei decided to approach the matter more prepared. He checked all the locks, made sure all the windows were closed, and even found an old baseball bat to feel more confident. He decided to spend the evening without horror movies, opting instead for a couple comedies, hoping the lighter atmosphere would help him relax. But as soon as the clock struck midnight, it started again. First, it was the subtle rustles coming from under the bed, then the creaks of the floorboards, as if someone was moving very slowly from corner to corner of his room. Alexei sat on the bed, straining to listen to every sound. The baseball bat in his hand seemed laughably useless against the unknown threat. At one point, he felt a strong urge to hide under the covers like he had as a child. But instead, he turned on the desk lamp and stood up resolutely. Enough, he thought as he headed towards the source of the sounds. Each step seemed to echo loudly in the silence of the house. After looking around the room and finding nothing but his own shadow, Alexei decided to check the rest of the house. He headed first to the living room, where the faint light of a street lamp through the curtains created eerie shadows. It was just as quiet as his room. As he made his way into the kitchen, he suddenly heard a new sound, what sounded like a low whisper. Alexei's heart hammered in unison with that whisper. He stopped, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Cautiously, he headed toward the source, the refrigerator. The whispering stopped as soon as he got closer. Opening the fridge, all he found was cold air and the remains of last night's pizza. Must be old pipes, he tried to convince himself as he closed the door. Walking back to his room, he felt the tension subside a little. Maybe all those sounds were really a figment of his imagination, heightened by fatigue and excessive impressions. He decided it was time to go to bed, hoping for a peaceful night. But the tranquility was short-lived. Just before dawn, Alexei was suddenly awakened by the feeling that someone was looking at him. The room was completely dark, and he couldn't make out anything but the dark outlines of the furniture. However, the feeling of presence was so real that Alexei had no doubt he was not alone. This night had changed everything. Now Alexei knew something was going on, something that wouldn't give him peace and couldn't be explained by logic. He had to find the answers. After a second sleepless night, full of uncertain rustles and quiet knocks, Alexei met the morning in a state of deep anxiety. The whole house seemed to him now alien and hostile. With the first rays of the sun, he decided to inspect the house in the afternoon, hoping that daylight would dispel his fears. The first thing he did was to go to the window of his room, where he found handprints. In the light, they seemed even more mysterious and disturbing. It was inexplicable how someone could have left them outside, for his room was on the second floor, and there were no marks under the window to indicate that anyone had stood under it or used the stairs. Then, walking through the house, Alexei noticed that some things were out of place. The books on the living room shelf, which he always kept in strict order, were scattered. There was a cup on the kitchen table, although he remembered that he had put all the dishes away in the cupboard. But the strangest thing was that on the floor in the hallway lay a man's shoes, which he had never seen before. Seeking an explanation, Alexei decided to check all the locks and windows. Everything was closed as it should be. There was not the slightest sign that anyone could have gotten into the house. This only made him more anxious, because now he couldn't write off what was happening as an intrusion. It was something else, something darker and more elusive. All further attempts to find a logical explanation for what was happening were futile. With each hour of the day, Alexei became more and more convinced that what was happening could not be explained by ordinary logic. He began to feel that something else was present in the house, something that remained invisible and incomprehensible. Toward evening, an almost complete apathy seized him. Alexei felt his will to act fading under the weight of uncertainty and fear. Thoughts of leaving the house began to arise in his mind. But where could he go? His parents weren't due back until tomorrow night. He decided that the last thing he could do was to try to keep track of any changes in the house and record them if possible. However, deep inside, Alexei realized that fighting the unknown might be more dangerous than he had anticipated. As night fell, he prepared himself for a new challenge, hoping he could find answers, or at least keep his sanity until morning. Another restless night filled with inexplicable sounds and heavy thinking, Alexei tried to find some logic in what was happening. His mind tiredly returned to the same question. What or who could be behind these strange events? During the day, the house seemed less threatening, but at night, every corner was filled with the shadow of fear. In the evening, as dusk thickened around the old house, Alexei noticed through the window the approach of an unknown car. It stopped at the gate, but no one got out. Alexei's heart hammered in anticipation and fear. Whoever it was, the arrival of a stranger at a time like this seemed more than strange. Determined not to let fear take over, Alexei stepped outside to get a better look at the car. However, as soon as he got closer, the car slowly moved off and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but questions. Attempts to see the license plate number or the driver's face were futile due to the lack of sufficient light. Returning to the house, Alexei tried to find a logical explanation for what had happened. Maybe it was just an errant driver? Or did one of the neighbors decide to check if everything was all right? But deep inside, he felt that it was something more, perhaps related to the unexplained events of the last few days. Trying to distract himself, Alexei decided to start cooking dinner. But his thoughts kept returning to the car and its mysterious driver. After eating, he checked all the locks in the house, this time with special attention, and went up to the second floor to try to get some rest. But the tranquility was short-lived. Suddenly, the house was filled with quiet, barely perceptible sounds of conversation. Alexei froze, listening. The voices sounded as if the source was somewhere very near, but it was not clear where exactly the sound was coming from. He walked cautiously through the rooms on the second floor, but found no one. With each step, the sense of unease grew stronger. The voices seemed to come from the walls, creating the illusion of someone else in the house. Alexei realized that it sounded absurd, but he couldn't deny the obvious. The house was alive with unknown presences. As he approached the stairs leading to the attic, he noticed that the hatch, usually closed, was ajar. Not remembering that any of the household had gone up there recently, Alexei felt that the answers to his questions might be there. Gathering his will into a fist, he slowly made his way toward the attic, preparing to come face to face with the unknown. On the third night, Alexei decided not to try to sleep. Armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, he sat in the living room, alert to every rustle. Time stretched slowly, and each hour seemed like an eternity. But despite his expectations, the night passed relatively quietly, except for a couple moments when it seemed like someone was whispering directly into his ear. Though turning around, he found no one. However, deep past midnight, when the silence seemed most deafening, a sound came from the outside world that shattered the illusion of safety. A car slowly pulled up to the house, and Alexei, peeking through the curtains, saw a black sedan come to a stop at the gate. He couldn't see the driver because of the reflection of the streetlight on the car windows. Minutes of waiting stretched unbearably. Alexei stood holding his breath, watching the car, but no one got out. After a while, the sedan slowly touched down and disappeared into the darkness. This incident only added questions to the already existing intertwining of mysticism and reality. Alexei tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a random passerby who took a wrong turn toward their house. But deep down, he knew that nighttime visits in such a secluded place couldn't be an accident. He wrote down the license plate number and time of arrival, hoping it might help him solve the mystery later. After this incident, the night returned to its usual flow. A silence broken only by his own footsteps and rapid breathing. But Alexei's inner tension did not subside. He began to feel that he was becoming part of something much bigger and darker than just night terrors. The next day, Alexei tried not to think about the night events, going about his normal business. But in the evening, his attention was again drawn to the unexplained phenomena. This time, it was voices. He heard them for the first time as he walked past the closed door to the basement. Stopping, he listened. Voices sounded muffled, as if people were talking in the next room, though he was sure there was no one in the house but him. Alexei slowly opened the door to the basement, expecting to see someone there, but the darkness met him with a blank stare. Turning on the light, he went downstairs, his heart pounding in anticipation of encountering the incomprehensible. But the basement was empty, and the voices were hushed as soon as he crossed the threshold. Returning upstairs, he tried to find the source of the sounds, but to no avail. The voices appeared and disappeared, making it seem as if the house was filled with invisible presences. They spoke in an incomprehensible language, giving the impression of a distant and inscrutable conversation. This discovery plunged Alexei into even greater despair. He began to wonder if these phenomena were really taking place, or if his mind was beginning to fail him. With each hour spent waiting for new manifestations of the unknown, he was more and more inclined to think that this night might be the decisive night in the search for answers. As soon as darkness swallowed the last rays of the sunset, Alexei resumed his position in the living room. He was determined to face the night, not as a victim, but as an explorer, eager to unravel the mysteries of his home. He set up tape recorders around the rooms, hoping to catch some evidence of the unusual phenomena that haunted him. Toward midnight, when the house had already fallen to silence, there was an unexpected knock on the door. At first, Alexei thought that his imagination was playing a cruel trick on him, but when the knock repeated, he realized it was reality. With his heart pounding in his chest, he walked to the front door. Peering through the peephole, he saw a dark figure standing on the threshold. With doubt in his voice, he asked who was there, but there was no answer. The knocking continued, insistent and rhythmic. Gathering all his courage, Alexei opened the door, but there was no one behind it. Standing on the threshold, he looked around, but the darkness concealed only emptiness. Walking back into the house, he felt a cold wind run down his back. It was a reminder that what was happening was beyond his comprehension. The knock on the door was only the beginning of a series of strange events that night. Later, there was a noise at the top of the house, as if someone was pacing heavily in the attic. Alexei, armed with a flashlight and a bat, headed toward the sounds, but as before, found no sign of intrusion or the presence of anyone. Returning, he noticed that the door to the basement was now ajar, though he remembered having closed it. Descending, he found that the old dust-covered television, long forgotten and never used, had suddenly turned on, showing only static noise on the screen. The voices he had heard before now seemed louder, coming from the white noise of the television. This night left Alexei's soul with even more questions than answers. He began to feel that he was becoming a pawn in someone else's big, uncharted game, the scenario of which was unknown to him. With each hour spent in vigilance, his determination to seek answers only strengthened, despite all the threats that this mystical mystery entailed. After a series of inexplicable events breaking the silence of the night, Alexei felt completely isolated from the outside world, as if the house had become his prison. This night was no exception. He had almost gotten used to the rustling, whispering, and strange sounds when suddenly there was a clear and decisive knock on the door. The knock took him by surprise. So much in surprise that for a moment he froze, not believing his ears. The time was late at night, and the visit seemed absurd. Gathering his will in a fist, Alexei walked to the door, trying to guess who might be standing behind it. However, when he opened the door, only the emptiness of the dark night stood before him. No sign that anyone had actually been there just a few seconds ago. As he walked back into the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The feeling became a constant companion, increasing his paranoia and fear. The night continued to disturb him with new manifestations. Now it was shadows flickering in his field of vision, and the sensation of cold breath on the back of his neck as he passed dark corners. Having exhausted his strength and resources, Alexei realized that the only way to keep his sanity was to confront his fears. He decided to spend the entire night awake, walking around the house and trying to find the source of his worries. But the more he searched, the less he realized what was really going on. As night changed to morning and the first rays of sunlight illuminated the room, Alexei felt temporarily relieved. But that was until he found a strange object in his pocket. An antique brass key that he had never seen before. This key seemed familiar, as if he had seen it in his dreams, or rather in the nightmares that were now his reality. Searching around the house, Alexei found that the key fit into an old chest in the attic that he thought had always been locked. Inside the chest, he found diaries and letters dating back to the early 20th century that belonged to the previous owner of the house, whose family had disappeared without a trace. Reading the diaries, Alexei realized that the house held a dark secret. The family had been the victim of an accident that led to their disappearance, and strange events had been happening in the house ever since. The letters described a series of accidents and strange events that began after they discovered an ancient artifact hidden in the walls of the house. Alexei realized that everything that was happening to him was connected to this artifact and the fate of the previous occupants. He decided that the only way to put an end to these events was to return the artifact to its true place and close the cycle of history that had been broken many years ago. Gathering all his strength, he set out on one last journey through the house to restore order and reconcile with the spirits of the past. As he did this, he felt the tension and anxiety leave him, and the house became quiet and peaceful once again. After Alexei had carried out his decision and returned the artifact to its place, he felt an extraordinary calmness envelope the house. It was a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since these strange events had begun. He spent the rest of the morning savoring the silence that seemed almost sacred to him now. When Alexei's parents returned, they found him sleeping a deep and serene sleep on the couch in the living room. They found it hard to believe the accounts of what had happened over the past few days, especially given the calm that now reigned in the house. Alexei himself began to wonder if it was all a figment of his imagination, brought on by stress and fatigue. However, deep inside, he knew that he had experienced something exceptional that had changed his view of the world and his own perception of reality. The events of those nights left an imprint in his soul, a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, and not all of them can be explained scientifically. In the following days and weeks, Alexei tried to lead a normal life. But in the evenings, when there was silence, his thoughts returned to what had happened. He often caught himself thinking about the fate of the previous occupants of the house and how thin the line between reality and mysticism was. Alexei's story stayed with him as a reminder that sometimes, in order to find answers, you just have to accept the unknown and learn to live with it. He learned that even the most mundane places and situations can hide amazing stories, and that every experience, whether light or dark, is part of the journey to understanding yourself and the world around you. With this realization, Alexei looked to the future with a new curiosity and respect for the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges life would bring. If these dark and absolutely real stories made your heart beat faster, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your subscription and likes will help us share even more thrilling stories with you. And of course, to make sure you don't miss our next videos with horrifying stories, activate notifications. Join our community of lovers of mysticism and the unknown, and be ready for new portions of adrenaline.